What if I told you that one of the most powerful armies in Asia was annihilated not by superior firepower, not by fortress walls, not by a single pitched battle, but by absolute nothingness? Imagine this. Over 100,000 soldiers marching into enemy territory, drums pounding, armor gleaming, commanders laughing at how easy this conquest would be. And then silence, empty roads, abandoned homes, food left rotting on tables, dogs gone, people gone, everything gone, just mountains watching, just wind whispering. And somewhere in those shadows, death was counting down. This is a story of how a massively outnumbered resistance turned invisibility into a weapon and made an empire's finest generals walk willingly into their own graves. Let's go back nearly 6 centuries. The year is 1427, and northern Vietnam is bleeding. For more than 10 years, the people have been clawing for freedom against the Ming dynasty's iron grip, occupation, taxation, cultural erasure. The resistance have been fighting with sticks and stolen swords, hiding in jungles, dying in ditches. And just when it seemed like maybe, just maybe, independence was within reach, the empire decided enough was enough. 2 enormous armies mobilized from southern China. The first, commanded by a seasoned warlord with decades of victories behind him, crossed through treacherous mountain passes with over 100,000 soldiers at his back. The second army approached from a different direction, ready to crush the resistance in a coordinated pincer movement. Their mission was simple: relieve the besieged imperial garrison, annihilate the rebels, drag this defiant land back under the emperor's boot. To anyone with eyes, the situation looked absolutely hopeless for the Vietnamese. The numbers weren't just bad, they were catastrophic. Outmanned 5-1, outgunned, out-resourced. Every logical calculation said the resistance was finished. But here's where it gets interesting, because the Vietnamese commanders weren't thinking like soldiers. They were thinking like hunters. Now pause for a second. When you picture a battlefield, you probably imagine 2 forces smashing into each other, swords clashing, cavalry charging, that kind of thing. But what if the deadliest move wasn't a fight at all? What if it was to disappear? That's exactly what happened. As the first massive invasion force descended into Vietnamese territory, they encountered something deeply unsettling. Nothing. No scouts harassing their flanks. No enemy formations blocking the roads. No ambushes in the obvious choke points. Just emptiness. Villages sat abandoned. Crops stood unharvested in the fields. Bridges that should have been burned remained intact. Roads that should have been blocked sat wide open. Even the livestock was gone. The Chinese commanders looked around and saw surrender. They saw a broken enemy too terrified to fight. They laughed. They joked about cowardly peasants. They pressed forward, confident they'd crush whatever remnants remained without breaking a sweat. And that assumption, that arrogance, was precisely what the Vietnamese were counting on. Let me introduce you to the architect of this nightmare. The leader of the resistance wasn't some noble born with a silver sword. He was a son of the hills, a man who'd spent a decade forging farmers and outlaws and monks into something terrifying, a ghost army that moved through mountains like mist and struck like lightning before vanishing again. To the empire, he was a nuisance, a criminal, a rebel to be crushed. To his people, he was the only reason hope still breathed. But he didn't work alone. Standing beside him was a mind so sharp it could cut deeper than any blade. A strategist, a scholar, a poet, if you can believe it. This man didn't just plan battles. He waged psychological warfare. He wrote letters so persuasive that enemy officers abandoned their posts. He planted rumors that made imperial soldiers doubt their own commanders. He understood that victory often lives in the space between a man's ears before it ever shows up on the battlefield. And then there were the warriors. Battle-hardened generals who could march troops through absolute hell and still bring them out fighting. Masters of ambush who knew every trail, every shadow, every place where death could hide. Young commanders trusted with missions that seemed suicidal on paper, but somehow worked because timing and terrain and raw courage came together perfectly. Together, this council of war designed something unprecedented. They would let the enemy come. They would guide them, step by careful step, deeper into a theater of death. And they would never let them realize it until the killing began. So picture the scene. That massive invasion army is pushing south, day after day. The roads are clear. The weather is holding. Morale is high. Every mile feels like progress. But something's off. The scouts start noticing details that don't quite add up. Why would villagers leave food behind? Why aren't the bridges destroyed? Why does every path seem just a little too convenient? A few officers voice concerns. They're ignored. Paranoia, the commanders say. These peasants are simply running scared. Meanwhile, behind the hills, thousands of Vietnamese soldiers are moving in complete silence. They're blocking escape routes. They're cutting supply lines. They're positioning themselves at choke points that won't look like choke points until it's far too late. The further the enemy advances, the deeper they sink into the trap, and they have absolutely no idea. Now here's the part that chills me to the bone. The Imperial scouts start disappearing. Not in battles. Just gone. One patrol doesn't return. Then another. Then the terrain starts changing. The valleys get narrower. The jungle presses closer. The roads become slick with unseasonal rain, almost like the land itself is fighting back. Supply wagons start vanishing. Messengers stop arriving. And slowly, a whisper of doubt begins spreading through the ranks. Something is wrong. But what? By the time they figure out, the jaws have already closed. October 10th, 1427. The invasion force enters a valley that will become a graveyard. It looks peaceful enough. Mountains rising on both sides. A shallow stream catching the gray light. Dense bamboo forests lining the slopes. Over 30,000 soldiers march through, drums beating, flags flying, still confident they're winning. And then the first arrow flies. One scream, one falling body. And suddenly the world explodes. Arrows rain from the trees, from the rocks, from the mist itself. Spears thrust from shadows. Fire erupts along the column. Sharpened bamboo stakes, hidden in the mud, impale soldiers who try to flee. The stream runs red within minutes. This wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. The invasion force was stretched along the narrow valley, with nowhere to maneuver. Heavy cavalry couldn't charge through bamboo thickets. Rear units couldn't push forward to help. Soldiers trampled each other trying to escape. The Vietnamese attacked with terrifying precision. For the people who'd suffered through 2 decades of occupation, the victory was sweet but heavy. Villages had been burned. Families had been destroyed. An entire generation knew nothing but war. And yet something survived the fire. Memory, identity, the unshakable belief that freedom could outlast armies. The leader of the resistance became ruler of his people, but he never forgot the hills that hid him or the friends who died in the forests. The strategists who'd written those devastating letters crafted a Declaration of Independence so powerful it still echoes today, written centuries before similar documents would appear elsewhere in the world. And across the land, stone markers and folk songs began preserving the names of those who'd stood when standing seemed impossible. Even now, that valley remains quiet. Mountains still rise like silent guardians. Rice fields bloom where blood once soaked the earth. But if you stand there long enough, locals say you can feel it. The weight of what happened. The breath of a nation that whispered into the mist. Let them come. We'll be waiting. Here's what this means beyond the history. We live in comfortable times. Screens. Noise. Distraction. But the world still demands the same things it always has. Courage when you're outmatched. Clarity when everything seems impossible. The refusal to disappear just because someone stronger wants you gone. Every generation faces its own valley, its own moment of silence before the storm, its own choice between surrender and standing. So I'll leave you with this question. When your moment comes, will you be ready? And maybe more importantly, are you paying attention to the silence right now? History loves to pretend she tells us everything, but there are always letters still buried in the earth, bones beneath the fields, whispers in the trees, stories that never made it into the official versions. Was this really the whole story? Or is there something deeper waiting just beneath the surface? From above, from behind, from both flanks simultaneously. Every squad knew exactly where to strike and when to pull back. The commanding general, that legendary warlord who'd won so many campaigns, tried desperately to rally his elite guard. He shouted orders. He attempted a breakout. And here's where the Vietnamese revealed just how coldly intelligent they were. They let him. They opened a gap in their lines, just wide enough to look like a mistake. And he charged straight through, believing he'd found salvation. Instead, he found ambush. The moment he cleared into the open, the final trap sprung. Soldiers on the ridge, above, released everything they had. His horse collapsed. He fell into the mud. He tried to rise. He never finished the motion. A single strike, and the head of the mighty general rolled to the dirt of a valley he should never have entered. The effect was instantaneous. When word spread that the commander was dead, the Imperial Army shattered. Panic replaced discipline. Thousands fled in every direction. Many never made it. Others threw down weapons and begged for their lives. And the Vietnamese, rather than chasing the survivors, simply stood there, watching, letting silence deliver the final message. But here's the thing. The war wasn't over. Remember that second army approaching from a different direction? They were still out there, still marching, still unaware of what just happened. When news of the disaster finally reached that second commander, it struck like a physical blow. He froze. He recalculated. But his army was already deep inside hostile territory. Supplies were running low. The maps were proving useless. And suddenly those empty villages didn't look like surrender anymore. They looked like exactly what they were. A warning he'd ignored. The Vietnamese didn't rush this one either. The attacks came slowly, deliberately. Sniper fire from tree leans, hidden stakes in riverbeds, ambushes that looked like retreats until they weren't. Every day, the noose tightened a little more. And all the while, those devastating letters kept appearing in the Imperial camps, written by the Resistance's master strategist. They spoke of mercy for those who surrendered. They detailed exactly how the First Army had been destroyed. They offered survival. Officers began deserting. Units began refusing orders. Morale collapsed. And when this Second Army finally reached its objective, the besieged Imperial garrison they'd marched so far to save, they found it already fallen, taken by tunnel sabotage, and a night assault that left nothing but smoking ruins. No reinforcements. No fortress. No hope. Just a single message from the Resistance. Surrender or die. He surrendered. Tens of thousands of Imperial soldiers laid down their weapons, not because they were weak, not because they were cowards, but because they'd been systematically outthought, outmaneuvered, and outfought by an enemy that refused to play by conventional rules. The aftermath changed everything. The Empire, humiliated beyond recovery, formally recognized independence. They called it strategic withdrawal. But history knows the truth. It was defeat, complete and total. If this made you think, if it made you feel something, hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and drop a comment telling me about a moment in history you think deserves more attention. Because the best stories are the ones we refuse to let stay buried.